Okay, hi to everybody and welcome to all the attendees to the first JIB Eastern and Midlands Forum. We was originally hoping that this would be sort of the main broadcast of the day, but then I think England v Germany may have pipped us to that one, but hopefully we'll do you justice and make this a productive, enjoyable forum. This event has been developed in collaboration of both employers and employees. So Steve Syson from Unite has had an input to this. Unfortunately, he can't be with us today. But it just shows you the sort of the collaboration between employees, employers, JIB, ECA and Unite the Union working together as one, really. So, and the interaction between all of those parties is fairly essential to key collaboration within the industry. With this exciting new development, okay, the JIB aims to develop an inclusive forum by being able to invite all JIB and non-JIB members in the region, which will increase engagement, reach and raise the profile of the JIB. And this format will provide more value and networking opportunities to attendees, particularly once we restart face-to-face meetings. So obviously over the last 18 months, a lot of these type of sessions would normally be face-to-face and would be a little bit more interactive and engaging. However, we are where we are and we're all sort of managing the pandemic how we need to, but continue what we're doing proactively and still in making sure that we get that engagement. Okay, we'll invite contributions from high-profile speakers on regionally specific subjects. So this is regards to the Eastern and the Midlands, okay? So joining me today are two guest presenters. So we've got Andrew Eldred, Director of Employment and Skills, ECA. And we've got Terry Brewer, Head of Public Sector Delivery for Social Value Portal. Okay, so I'd really welcome those two guest speakers. Thank you very much for putting your time out to come and do a piece on this session. We were due to have a contribution from Jamie Jordan, but due to some last-minute unforeseen circumstances, he's unable to attend. Andrew will explore the issue of competence and skills, giving an overview of the 2020 Setting the Bar report, the BSI Flex 8670 and the new Building Safety Competency regime. And then finally, Terry will provide a high-level summary that will help suppliers understand more about social value, how public sector organisations are requesting social value in procurements, and how that relates to submitting good social value bids. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll hand straight over to Andrew, and thank you very much for joining.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Alistair. I'm not sure how high profile I am, but I'll do my best. And as the slide says, I'm going to talk about competence specifically in the context of building safety. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last couple of years, you'll be fully aware of the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the aftermath, and this is really to give you a chance to get up to date in terms of the response to that. Okay. I mean, just as a little bit of background, and you'll see the CLC logo on the slides, my involvement in this has been through the CLC. Clearly, there are people from the electrotechnical industries, and I'll be mentioning some of them a little bit later on, who've been involved in more specific targeted work. My involvement really has come through the Construction Leadership Council, so I'm going at it from a broader industry perspective, not specific to electrotechnical, though clearly we can talk about that later on, including in the question and answer session. Now, I mean, in terms of what we're talking about in terms of competence, well, there's a definition. I don't think there's any surprises in that definition. The concepts of skill, knowledge, experience and behaviours are very familiar to us, certainly recently in connection with apprenticeships. And that quote comes from the BSI Flex, which Alistair's already mentioned, which has just been published in the last couple of months, a code of practice which sets out the core criteria for competence frameworks. And each sector, there is an expectation that they will be in the process soon of drawing up sector-specific competence frameworks under the overarching regime established by BSI Flex 8670. Next slide. So that's the definition of competence. What's the reality of competence? This is the description that Dame Judith Hackett used to describe. Obviously, she's describing a world which is broader and in many cases beyond the typical sort of organised world of the JIB. But what she's describing there, nevertheless, has echoes in terms of a lack of rigour, a lack of coherence, and certainly when it comes to the residential market, domestic market, that is leading to a lot of dilution and a lot of fragmentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's been going on over the last few years? Well, one of the first things that was set up was an organisation, an entity called the Competence Steering Group. And under the Competence Steering Group, you have all those different working groups, all looking at competence within the context of a particular occupation or family of occupations. The one that I'm going to major on today is installers, which is working group 2. Obviously, that's the one where electricians, fire technicians and others sit, and colleagues of mine, including Mike Smith from the ECA, Tom Brooks, the chair of the Fire and Security Association, and indeed the JIB have sat. But as you can see, there are other occupations covered as well. Next slide, please. So there's been lots of talk, there've been lots of reports, and that latest slide sort of shows you, if you like, a succession of reports, each getting more detailed, more specific. And with the issuing of BSI Flex 8670 version 3 in April, that's the code of practice I've already sort of quoted from. We're now really entering the phase, as I said, of each sector, each occupation being responsible for developing a sector-specific competence framework. Now, you can look at this narrowly in terms of these are competence frameworks just covering building safety in higher risk buildings. Certainly, if you read BSI Flex itself, it is clearly intended to have a broader application than just higher risk buildings. And certainly that seems to be the approach in the early stages of the development of sector-specific frameworks. Certainly on the installer side, people are looking at something much broader in application, not just high risk buildings. Next slide, please. So what is a sector-specific framework? Well, BSI Flex, there you are. There's a sort of effectively a table of contents that BSI Flex sets out in considerable detail. I've just given you the headlines there. A lot of it will be familiar to us. I mean, prior learning requirements, clearly our stance, and this is you know, the long-standing tradition with our own sector, the importance of education. Other stuff a little bit newer and potentially more challenging, revalidation, the need for people to be revalidated in their competence, and maintaining competence, which is CPD and upskilling. And checking competence, obviously, in our context, familiar from the ECS card system. Obviously, in the domestic and residential market, that's a system that has got a lot further to go in order to be accepted as a mechanism for checking competence. Next slide, please. In terms of the specifics of Working Group 2, on the left-hand side, you've got the specific recommendations with regard to installers that Working Group 2 provided as part of the Setting the Bar report late last year. It really does align very much with BSI Flex, particularly, of course, the reference to qualifications, to prior learning. This is written, obviously, in the context of the industry as a whole. So level 2 qualifications do apply to a lot of building fabric occupations, clearly within the context of electrical and electrotechnical. The rule is level 3. In terms of what's happening next on Working Group 2 and installers, as I said, the next phase is the development of sector-specific frameworks. For some of those other working groups, Working Group 1, Working Group 3, 4, and so on, much more narrowly focused already on a particular occupation or a relatively small family of occupations. The big issue for Working Group 2 installers is, of course, that it covers a vast range of occupations and very diverse occupations at that. And so the approach that we're taking, and this is a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few months with Working Group 2, is finalising some guidance tied both to BSI Flex, but also the Working Group 2 specific recommendations for individual installer sectors to start developing their own sector-specific competence frameworks, and to identify 8 priority sectors. And there's a list there, a full list there of the 8 priority sectors, 5, if you like, from the fabric area, and 3 from the engineering services. You'll see that electrotechnical isn't part of that. Fire detection and alarm systems is, however, there is currently, as I understand it, preparatory work going on in relation to electrotechnical, but the development of that sector-specific framework probably will not get underway properly until next year. It's hoped that those pilot groups will be concluding in the first quarter or second quarter of next year, and the lessons learned from those pilots will themselves help to inform the development of further sector-specific frameworks, including the electrical. Okay, next slide, please. And I think this is my final slide. Opportunities and challenges for industry. Opportunities above the line, challenges, you'll note, far more numerous. I tend to be quite a pessimistic fellow at the bottom of the line. In terms of opportunities, I mean, clearly the big opportunity here is to address the issues which I quoted from Dame Judith Hackett in the first instance. A lack of robustness, a lack of coherence, well, greater robustness, greater coherence, and from an industry point of view, a company point of view, as well as an individual point of view, improved outcomes in relation to safety, building safety, quality, productivity, and career progression. If we start to have a broader construction industry where people do have a solid basis of common and shared, identified, recognized qualifications, then career progression becomes a lot easier rather than the somewhat fragmented and truncated system that we have at the moment. Again, I'm speaking very much within the context of broader construction. I think it's fair to say that in electrical, we're significantly better off than many other sectors of construction, although certainly not all the way there already in terms of what the ultimate goal of all this is. And some of those challenges are challenges for us almost as much or as much as they are for other sectors. We are dealing with a lot of experienced workers, again, mainly focused in the domestic and residential side of the business, a lot of experienced workers without validated competence, without qualifications. So there is a challenge there. Systems and resources for maintaining and revalidating competence. Not in place at the moment. Arguably, ECS is ahead of the game in terms of areas such as registered electrician and the new CPD reporting function. But this is going to have to become a lot bigger, and a lot of scaling up is going to be required right across industry. And there are going to be some sectors, I think particularly those sectors where levels of direct employment are considerably lower than they are for us. We do have one of the highest levels of direct employment within wider construction. I do think there are issues around how that can be achieved. Also, of course, in terms of raising the bar, if you raise the bar, by definition, fewer people get over the bar. And so a question then arises in terms of, from a contractor point of view, from a client point of view, what could the impact be on labour availability, and what's the impact likely to be in terms of cost and programme. I think the answer to that almost certainly is we know the direction we're headed in, but I've heard certainly some people talking about a time frame of anything up to 10 years to progress from where we are now to where we ultimately need to be. But I don't think there's any doubt in people's minds about where we need to be, and where we need to be is certainly a better place than where we are at the moment. In terms of involvement, listen to my final remarks on this. In terms of involvement, as I said, ECA is already actively involved in a number of areas, including in the fire detection and alarms pilot group. Unite, likewise. Indeed, Unite has just been confirmed as a member of the Interim Industry Competence Committee, which is the group that reports directly to the building regulator, who is the sort of top civil servant who is meant to be overseeing all of this. And indeed, the JIB itself is heavily involved, specifically when it comes to the whole issue of demonstrating confidence through card schemes, and the sort of technological changes that will need to be made to card schemes in order to provide greater visibility to clients, main contractors and others about the makeup of the workforce. Of course, those of you familiar with ECS check will again know that the JIB and ECS are somewhat ahead of the game compared to others in that area. So I hope that's given you a flavour. I don't think there are intended to be questions at this point. I think we're dealing with questions at the end. But I'll hand back to Alistair now.
Thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated. So regards to Jamie Jordan, who was meant to be here from the Bank of England, I would like to now introduce Andrew Holder, who has managed to go out of his way to join us and fill in the Bank of England part of this session. So Andrew, welcome to the forum. And the platform is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alistair. I'm hoping that you can hear me and that everything's working okay. And I'm hoping we can get Jamie's slides up. While that's being sorted out, good afternoon, everyone. If you've not come across the bank's agencies before, we act as the eyes and ears of the bank on the ground. So across the whole of the UK, with people who up until COVID were going out speaking to companies, finding out what's happening and reporting back to head office and through them to the Monetary Policy Committee. I'm one of Jamie's colleagues. I work in central southern England, which is Berkshire, Surrey, Dorset, Hampshire and Sussex. I'm hoping the slides will come up. That looks like it. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Just to say that most of what I'll say today is based on the forecast we published at the beginning of May, but we also updated with not changing policy, but a new summary, which we published last week. So there's a bit of an update on that. But next slide, please. So this chart shows our expectation for GDP growth, well, GDP levels, everything we make, do and sell in the UK. If you've not seen these charts before, they do bear a bit of explanation, because previous governors have needed no prompting to say that all forecasts are wrong. If I had a straight line and said this is our forecast, it would be wrong. It wouldn't turn out like that. So we try and show the balance of probabilities, and these charts are done so the dark bit in the middle is the most likely range of outcomes. The other colors are other possibilities. They're slightly less likely, but still within range of probabilities, and the shaded area represents something like 90% confidence intervals. We've done these charts in terms of the level of gross domestic product, not growth rates, and that's because of the severe impact that COVID had. The UK economy fell in size by about 25% in spring last year when everything was shut down. We then had, on the face of it, what looks like a very rapid rebound by most standards in the summer of 2020, but it still left the UK economy significantly short of where it was pre-COVID. The big difference between the February forecast and the May forecast is that really what happened at the start of 2021. We were expecting GDP to fall back by about 4 percentage points in the first quarter with a renewed lockdown. But in practice, it only fell by about 1.5 percentage points. And that's consistent with a theme we've picked up, that the economy has got used to working with COVID restraints and COVID lockdowns. So the impact of the English lockdown in November last year and the renewed lockdowns across most of the country this year has been much, much less than we saw in spring last year. The level of activity is still something sort of probably close to 10% below what it was before COVID, but it hasn't, the lockdown this year hasn't had nearly so much impact. Looking ahead for the rest of 2021, if we see easing of COVID restrictions in line with a new roadmap, if we see easing of health fears, then we do expect a pretty rapid recovery through the rest of 2021. And that reflects reopening and people getting back to doing what they got. It won't be an even recovery. We know there's some households who have really struggled, but there are others who have found they've had more cash coming in because they haven't been spending. We know there's some businesses who it will take a long time to get back to normal, but there's others who have done really well and others who expect to do very well over the summer, particularly for things like those serving staycationing. So if the economy does reopen, if we don't have further lockdowns, then our best guess is that we'll get back to pre-COVID levels of activity probably by around the end of this year. And if it turns out, if we do get there, then we expect growth to continue, but at a much more moderate pace. So once we get back to sort of pre-COVID levels of activity, we do expect growth to continue, but it will be at a much more steady pace. There will be some tailwinds around. We know there's shortages of some things, things like garden furniture. There's some manufacturing components, some building materials we know that have been in short supply, and that will be a headwind to some activity in the second half of this year. But we do expect a significant improvement and getting back to much closer to how things were before. And next slide, please. Go back one if you can. Okay, this chart, we've added a couple of colored lines which show the modal projection that we think most likely. And the point this is trying to make is that in May, the forecast was upgraded and we expected activity to be higher all across the forecast period. And that reflected increasing optimism that vaccines were having an impact, that economies were getting on top of COVID, and also increased fiscal support from authorities, from public authorities across the world. America had a much greater fiscal support than had been planned, and also in the UK. So if we go on to the next slide, a big change between our February and our May forecasts was the extension of the furlough scheme. So the February forecast was done when we expected furlough to expire at the end of March. It's now been extended and it will taper off in the months ahead. So we were optimistic that although there would be some increase in furlough, so some increase in unemployment, it would be relatively muted, going up to only about 5.5% rather than closer to 8%. So with the extension of furlough, with the improved prospects for the UK economy, we expected that most people would go back would find jobs, they would go back to either their current job or they'd be able to get a job elsewhere. And actually, when we go around talking to companies, we have found that we're hearing increasing reports from a range of different businesses that they're finding it difficult to recruit. Some of that reflects the fact that a lot of people are trying to recruit all at the same time, but we've also seen there seems to be underlying shortages of some skills, and also the people who relied on overseas workers there's not so many around now, which could be COVID, could be Brexit. There's lots of things going on, but we are starting to hear that there is a bit more pressure in the labour market. And next slide, please. If it turns out anything like our central forecast, we expect inflation to be a bit above our 2% target in the second half of this year. Inflation's already got back very close to marginally above the 2% target in the latest figures. The increase in inflation from the start of this year mostly reflects that we're no longer benefiting from cheap oil and energy prices. At the start of 2020, oil prices fell remarkably quickly, and that took energy and fuel prices down. So inflation went much lower than the 2% target, but that's come now out of the year-on-year figures now, and inflation is just a bit above the 2% target. We're keeping a very close eye on this because there are pressures in the pipeline. We're seeing increase in costs from quite a range of inputs into manufacturing, into construction, and things like that. It's not filtering so much through to final consumer prices, but it's something we're keeping a close eye on, and we expect a bit to come through in the second half of this year. Our best guess at the present is that this will be a very transitory and temporary thing, and that as we go into next year, we'll see inflation start to fall back towards the 2% target. But it is something we're keeping a close eye on for now. Next slide, please. So this chart shows interest rates over the last 20 years or so, and stark difference before and after the financial crisis. We had, before COVID hit, we had started to raise interest rates a little bit, but as COVID hit, we reduced them to 0.1% and announced a further increase in quantitative easing, our asset buying policy, trying to put money directly into the economy. At its June meeting, the MPC didn't make any change in policy, but they reiterated that we're watching very closely, and we're not intended to tighten policy until there's clear evidence that we've closed the gap in spare capacity and inflation has returned sustainably towards the 2% target. So we're keeping a careful eye. There's lots of risks on both sides. We'll be ready, looking to respond if any of those happen. So that's all I was going to say. I'll be happy to take questions on that at the end of the session. Thanks very much for listening.
Many thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that and presentation. Thank you. So now we'll move on to Terry. So Terry is just going to provide a high-level summary that will help suppliers understand more about social value and how public sector organisations are requesting social value in procurements. Okay, so over to you, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Just while I'm waiting for the slides. So, yeah, Terry Bruce, I lead on public sector delivery for Social Value Portal. My background is local government procurement, so that's where I've got a lot of knowledge about how to apply social value in public sector procurements. I apologise, I'm a bit croaky today because I got picked up a bug from the grandkids, and that's before I even started shouting at the telly tonight because trying to cheer England on. Anyway, next slide, please, Roger. Next one, yeah. So just a quick overview of Social Value Portal. So our USP, if you like, is really about our measurement system, which is the national themes, outcomes and measures, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. But linked to that, we have a procurement portal, so that in terms of public sector procurement and other procurements, bidders can submit social value offers in an open, fair and transparent way in accordance with the public procurement regulations. And then we go on to also assist with contract management support for our customers, etc. And we can also report on social value delivered in many different ways, be that by project, by department, across an organisation, or within a particular locality. Next slide, please. And these just some of our public sector customers. Currently, we're working with over 80 local government organisations, and as you can see, there are a wide range of other public sector bodies. Next slide, please, Roger. And we also work with a number of private sector customers. Reasons for that, why they come to us, is partly because they're bidding for public sector work, and we'll assist if we're not conflicted. But also there's a lot more pressure from ethical investors nowadays, who want to invest in companies who are giving back to communities, particularly following the Carillion collapse, and want to make sure investing in companies that aren't going to go down that sort of route, and also companies just wanting to understand their corporate social responsibility spend better. Next slide, please. So just an overview of social value. So in terms of the legal background to it, obviously there was the Social Value Act in 2012, and what we refer to as sister and brother legislation that came through later on in Scotland 2014, and then in Wales, the Future Generations Act. And then more recently, last year, in September, government released Procurement Policy Note 0620, which really talked about how central government was going to implement social value. So from the 1st of January this year, all government departments are required to seek social value in their contracts above threshold at a rate of at least 10%. And then more recently, the Queen's speech announced the procurement bill, and that's littered with talk about social value throughout that. So rather than it being a nice to have or something as the Social Value Act itself sets out that councils should consider, is now something that councils will have to do and central government departments will have to do as well. Next slide, please. So what we're finding is that councils are embedding social value across goods, works and services. It varies as to the threshold at which they apply it. So a number apply at 100k, but we do see a few councils that are applying social value requirements at contracts at 25k or 50k. But probably the most significant thing we're seeing now is that weightings for social value are creeping up. So if we'd been having this discussion 2 years ago, I'd probably said 10% was a bit racy, and that was probably the limit that councils have gone to. But what we're seeing now is quite a lot of councils going to 15 and 20% even, and for a couple, we've even seen Brighton and Manchester issue tenders for that 30% for particular requirements. So weightings are creeping up, and what that means is that increasingly social value will be the determinant factor in who wins a particular procurement. Next slide, please. And then just to say, in terms of how the government are applying it, so a little bit more about that PPN 0620. So what the government's looking for is social value to be provided against these 5 themes: COVID-19, economic inequality, etc. And then they are working on quality basis only. So most, if not all, councils will operate on the basis of seeking a quantitative social value offer and then supported by qualitative statements. The way the government is approaching it is to ask for quality only, and we're recommending to them that they should think about getting quantitative statements, not to evaluate, but simply to so that they know for contract management purposes what's due to be delivered when, but also for reporting purposes internally in terms of knowing what's been offered and what's actually been delivered. Next slide, please. And next. So just briefly cover, how do we measure social value? So something called the National Themes, Outcomes and Measures. So there are 5 themes, 20 outcomes and 48 measures. So this is a standard that's applying to local government that the National Social Value Task Force, which we'll talk about briefly in a second, has pulled together and recommends as the method that most councils should be working to. And this is a slide from Staffordshire, so you can see that it's widely across local government. Next slide, please. So the way we measure social value is, as I mentioned, we've got 5 themes. So one is around jobs, one around growth, one around healthy communities, etc. There's a theme of environment, as you might expect, and finally one on innovation. So if a bidder's got something that it feels it can offer that hasn't been asked for, it can do so. If you click again, then against each theme we have a whole series of outcomes. So against jobs, it might be more opportunities for disadvantaged people. Under environment, it might be carbon emissions are reduced, etc. And then the next area, please, Roger, is measures and units. So each outcome has got a series of measures associated with it. So it might be number of ex-offenders to be employed. It might be number of hours of local community project volunteering that's taken place, and the units represent the measure, how that particular measure is to be recorded. And click again, please. And then what we've done is we've calculated the value for each social value measure. So we have a research team led by an economist that does the work on this, and it's based on Green Book Treasury data and Office of National Statistics information and other measures that are available to actually arrive at a value for a particular piece of social value. Next slide, please. So just to give you a practical example of how this might work. So let's assume a council has come out for a particular procurement, and that's going to result in a new job being created or a job being retained. So if we take the first one, so if you click through, please, Roger. So on the first one, if you consider that job that's been created might go to somebody who's coming from a happy family with a good education, good CV, etc. On the other hand, and if you could click again, Roger, that could go to somebody whose background is a troubled family, maybe got a petty criminal record, possibly getting worse. Now, in social value terms, the person on the left is probably not worth anything because they're coming from a happy family. They're not going to trouble the justice system or have health issues. Their family will look after them, and chances are they're going to get a job down the line fairly soon anyway. Whereas the job goes to the person on the right, then they're not having to be part of the justice system. They're not having health issues, plus which they've got money in their pocket to spend. So and generally they will spend that locally. So what from our measurement system, we calculate that to be worth about 24k, and it depends where you are in the country, of course, but we calculate that to be 24k, and that's the amount of social value that job is worth to the local council for that individual getting that position. Next slide, please. I mentioned the National Task Force, so that's chaired by the Local Government Association. It's got a wide range of organisations that participate in that, including the TUC, CBI, etc. Government departments, Crown Commercial Service also sit on that. And it's really a coalition of the willing to oversee social value development and implementation across public sector to ensure it's done in an equitable way and addresses issues that crop up. Next slide. So I'll just very briefly, I won't take very long, just run through how this works in practice in a procurement. So this example is from Solihull. So this is a contract is just putting their tills in their schools, but it's worth about £500,000, up to £500,000. Next slide, please. So what we do is we map our TOMS measures to the council's themes. So these are not, the themes on the left there are not our themes, these are Solihull's themes. As you can see, we've mapped a range of outcomes. Generally, we work using the national TOMS measurement system. We've mapped those to Solihull's themes. Next slide. Now, Solihull have broken this down. So this is their quality price matrix. So as you can see, quality 40%, price 45%. Solihull has set social value at 15%, and what they've done is they've then further subweighted that 50-50 or 7.5% each between quantitative and qualitative social value offer. Next slide, please. So this is what the bidder would see on our portal. So this is one from Waltham Forest, but basically Waltham Forest measures are on the left-hand side under question, and the units are shown there. What the bidder then does is submit in the boxes shown the number of each measure that they're offering. So it's not a requirement they fill in every box. It's whatever you feel is proportionate and relevant to offer for a particular procurement. So putting the numbers of that you're offering of each, so if it's 4 jobs, you stick 4 in there. The system automatically calculates the social value target value. And then you see there's a box for description to upload evidence about how you're going to deliver that social value. So, you know, it's about giving credibility and confidence to the public sector organisation that you're able to deliver the social value that you're offering, and you've got credible processes in place to do so. Next slide, please. So this was the outcome of that particular procurement. So there had 7 bidders. The green bar is the contract value, and the purple bar is the social value additionality offered. So the purple isn't part of the green bar. This is social value add that the bidders have offered for this particular contract. And as you can see, bidder 5 offered the most social value, but equally it's also the highest contract price. The actual winner, if you just press a couple of times, Roger, the actual winner was actually bidder 3, who, whilst not offering the greatest social value, offered the overall best mix between social value, quality and price. So you can see that that's how that's operating in this case. Next slide, please. And then just to say, if you want more information, please go onto our website. There's lots of guides, and particularly I'll draw your attention to the social value easy guides for SMEs, PCSEs and buyers, which is aimed specifically at helping those in those categories to develop their social value offers and what to look for and how to bid. That's it from me, thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Much appreciated. To all the attendees, we've had a really sort of insightful report from the 3 guest speakers, and thank them all for that. So we have about 10 minutes now for Q&As. Please submit any questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll endeavour to answer them and point them in the direction of who is suited the most.
I'm not sure they can type that quickly, Alistair.
So I think, you know, in summary of terms, I've got a couple of sort of questions that I can go through whilst people are thinking about any questions. So Andrew Eldred, because we've got obviously the 2 Andrews on the call now. So what steps have been taken by the electrotechnical industry to get ready for this new competence regime?
Okay, well, it's not finished yet because, as I said, the sector-specific framework development probably will only get underway next year. I think it's fair to say, though, that the direction of travel that the rest of the industry are now embarked on is a direction that we're comfortable with, and we're already on that direction of travel. I mean, clearly the emphasis that our sector has always had on proper qualifications, apprenticeships and so on, it's a lot stronger within our area than in other parts of construction. So I think we're comfortable with that. I think the work that the JIB has done, particularly around ECS registered electrician, which embodies both the latest edition of the wiring regs and an ongoing commitment to CPD. Clearly, that's an important theme in the overarching framework that's setting the benchmark for everybody else. So I think, again, we're a little bit ahead of the game there. And indeed, I mean, I welcome the fact that at last ECS is in a position to sort of implement that by virtue of the availability of the CPD recording mechanism that's now available through ECS. Also, of course, we have well-established systems of assurance of organisational competence, and certainly the developments of the last year with the electrotechnical assessment specification standard, which is the standard all the certification bodies, your NICs, your Alexas, your NAPITs work to. That has tightened up quite considerably in the area of competence, not merely the qualifications of those who fulfill the role of a qualified supervisor, but indeed requirements on companies to demonstrate that they're managing the competence of the people working for them. Indeed, not just direct employees, but others such as labour-only subcontractors, agency workers, and so on. So I think, although we actually haven't in earnest started the detailed work in terms of a sector-specific framework, we're already a fair way along the way compared to others. And I think probably other specialisms, I mean, fire and security likewise, I think are a fair way along the path.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. We have a question from the attendees. So, has Brexit impacted supply of material, and is this added to the inflationary pressure? So that's probably over to Andrew Holder.
Okay, thanks. It's a good question, and something has been affecting supply and pricing, but it's very difficult. There's so many moving parts. It's very difficult to disentangle what the impact of Brexit is compared with global developments. We had shipping problems even before Brexit and before COVID struck. So even last autumn, there was problems with getting, so it was after COVID, but last autumn, there was problems with getting containers around the world. But for many commodities, we've seen global demand outstripping supply over recent quarters, and we've seen shortages of a wide range of things. So that there's a global story going on. On top of that, there is also an additional twist from Brexit. Many companies have got used to the requirements now, but there's still difficulties much more over the Irish Sea than the short Strait Channel crossing. So we know that there's been some cases of suppliers not wanting to send goods across borders, and there's been things like that. But I think the biggest problems have been the global things more than Brexit, but time will tell quite what the mix of those is.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Terry, regards to, I mean, obviously the social value portal, I mean, what does that mean to JIB member companies? How can we put ourselves in the best light for winning public sector contracts?
Well, all it means is that as the Social Value Act was written, councils and public sector organisations were able to consider social value and whether they wanted to seek it, and there was still quite a few organisations that weren't doing that. They considered it and thought, no, we don't need to do anything. but the PPN 0620 and the public sector public procurement reforms that are coming along mean that it will be an absolute requirement. So if you've been avoiding it so far, you can't going forward. So it's actually essential for you to be up to speed on social value, and because you'll start losing business if you're not, if you're dealing with the public sector. And the things to think about, I think, are so really thinking up front about what social value could we offer as an organisation. You know, not waiting until the tender comes out, but getting some preparation going. And you can use the TOMS, the NTOMS measure as a guide as to the sort of things that you can pull together. But also think very much about your local council if you're working with councils, because whilst the national TOMS and there's an approach I've set out to social value that most councils are following, nevertheless, there's quite a lot of nuances between councils, the way they implement it and differences. So really get to know your council and how they come out for social value and ask for it, so that you're best prepared. And if you're a smaller SME, then definitely, you know, look at the primes will be looking to work very proactively with local SMEs as part of seeking procurements with councils, etc. So, you know, think about connecting with primes and engaging any pre-market engagement activity there is on particular procurements. And then finally, I think I don't want to teach people suck eggs, but read the question. As a procurement professional, I can assure you, I can't tell you how many times people have, you know, where you've asked a question, they've answered the question they wished you'd asked, not the question you have actually asked, and lost a lot of marks. So we really think if a social value question's been asked, answer the question that's been asked, not the one you wished had been asked. And then don't overpromise is my other thing. You know, think carefully about what you can deliver, what's relevant and proportionate given the size and nature of the contract you're bidding for, to offer by way of social value. So don't overpromise, and then make sure you're able to deliver what you've offered, because a number of councils now including remedies for non-delivery of social value. So beware of that.
Okay, thanks, Terry. A question for Andrew Eldred. So why was the electrotechnical left out of the CSG working group, and why did the working group make a decision to not cover it?
It wasn't left out. I talked about 8 pilot sectors, and a decision had to be taken about what the 8 pilot sectors were, if you like, they're going to be priority 1. Other sectors will follow. As I said, electrotechnical almost certainly will follow next year. In terms of the priorities, we tried to balance, if you like, building fabric and building services. And it was thought, given the centrality of fire safety, that if we were going to have an electrotechnical discipline, the one to sort of put at the top of the list, for understandable reasons, is fire detection and alarms. Likewise, on the mechanical side, it was considered that ductwork was a good start. And you'll see on the building fabric side, you know, prioritizing cladding, given the context within which this development is taking place. Again, you know, a fairly easy decision to take. So it hasn't been left off. Indeed, arguably, those 5 recommendations that Working Group 2 ended up making were heavily influenced, I believe, by colleagues of mine who were sort of talking about things such as third-party accreditation of organisations, which we're very familiar with, which the fire detection part of the industry is very familiar with, but a lot of the rest of construction isn't. So I think electrotechnical has been very influential. Certainly, we've held the qualifications as being a fundamental element of all of this as well. Again, not necessarily everybody in that working group 2, were agreeing with that, and that was fairly hard fought. So it will come. It has influenced things anyway, but it just for the purposes of prioritising things, fire detection alarms was thought to be the one to go first.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And another one for you, Andrew, is will there be a specific route to JIB/ECS recognition for panel building operatives and other similar specialist sectors?
Oh, it's Jamie. That's a good prod from Jamie to me to get back to him on this question. Yeah, I mean there is already a recognition of the previous apprenticeship. There's now recognition of the MOET apprenticeship standard, which is one of the apprenticeship standards under which you can qualify now as a panel builder. And in addition, there is now recently we've recognised, I don't think it's been published yet, but we've recognised the engineering fitter standard as also being an appropriate one. All of things obviously have to be rolled out, and the sort of assessor capacity also has to be built up, which is not easy for a sector, such a niche sector as panel building. I know where Jamie's coming from. There's also the issue of those who want to pursue this and want to get qualified outside of the apprenticeship. And there are a lot of people in the panel building sector, because of the lack of structured training, who are very experienced but don't have the qualification. And there is the beginning of a discussion around that, which I know Jamie needs to be plugged into. But again, part of the problem with this is it's such a niche sector. It's very difficult, shall we say, to attract other people in to support something where the numbers likely to come through are open to question. But I do promise I will get back to Jamie.
Thanks, Andrew. So look, that's all we've got time for the Q&As. If there is any other questions that people want to ask, by all means, don't hesitate to contact Roger Horn at the JIB, and then we can follow that up afterwards. I would like to thank all three, so Andrew, and Terry, for their contribution and their extremely useful insights into the various topics. So much appreciated, guys. We'd welcome any feedback. So if you feel that we should be covering other topics for future events, this is the first session that we've done for the forum. It's all part of engaging with a wider audience and making sure that everybody can get something out of these sessions. So if you do feel that there's any specific topics that you'd like to cover at future events, again, drop us a line and then we will have a look at that for the next forum. A recording of this event will be available following through the JIB's YouTube channel. I would thank everybody for attending, and hopefully it's been a really useful session for everybody involved. And wish you all the best, and hopefully we have a good result tonight in the England versus Germany game, to finish off a good day. All right, so thank you all very much, guys.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.